It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to think about things before the age of 10. I mean, everything when I went basically when I turned 10 years old and was diagnosed, that's kind of when my life I felt like my life started. A lot of I mean, I remember a lot of like school things, a lot of grade school things, sports things, playing with my friends and stuff like that. But I think a lot of majority of what I remember, at least that I've put in the memory bank, is probably starts about age 10, because that's when everything started moving for me in life. I had what they thought was pneumonia, and I was going to a doctor in Valdez, and for some reason my fever would go away, but my cough never did, and they couldn't figure out why my cough would never go away. And then after a few weeks, they noticed a lump on the side of my neck, and what they found out to be a lymph node that was kind of popping up and kind of pushing out. Wasn't coming out of the skin, but it was kind of noticeable right there beside my neck. And they took a biopsy and then sent it to the pathologist at Valdez. And then that pathologist immediately sent it to Baptist, to Brenner Children's Hospital. And I was then called by my pediatrician and informed that they had did a pathology report on it and that it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Immediately think about death, because back then cancer was still thought of the C word as being the D word, the death word. But when they came and told us, I didn't really take it that way. A lot of people around you take it that way. To me, it's always been a hurdle. It's always been something that was put in front of me to get over. The decisions that were made, my parents in 1989, being 10 years old, they allowed me to make all the decisions regarding my treatment. There wasn't anything that they said or would do without me giving them the okay. My parents said, if you're going to get stuck and you're going to get these poisons shot into your system, then you're going to have the right to say yes or no. And that's one of the things that I've always respected my parents for. Having my parents allow me to make the decisions for myself. I mean, of course, anytime the doctors would come and say something, they would try to tell my parents first, and my parents would immediately point them to me and say, no, either we're sitting in the room with Travis whenever you tell us, or you tell him first and then you come tell us second. That's how they treated it. That's how we always treated it, no matter what the issue was, no matter what the treatment was. That's how we always treated it as a family. It was Travis gets to make the decisions on his treatment, and we will follow suit with what he decides. In 1989, of course, I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma had a certain standard treatment at the time, was vincristine, adriamycin, Cytoxan, pretty much the same standard of treatment that they do with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma these days. None of the real medicines have really changed, except some oral medications and things like that. But back then, it was alternate weeks of treatment. It was Cytoxan, adriamycin, vincristine. Vincristine ultimately affects your nerves. I played sports and stuff, so I had to be careful the weeks I was taking vincristine, because it would definitely affect your nerves. And if you end up damaging any kind of nerves, I mean, it could do long-term damage, for your life. I mean, I would have to go in the hospital for 3 days and have 72-hour chemo treatments, where I was on chemo for 6 hours and then off for 8, and then on for 6, then off for 8. That would go in on Thursday, leave on Sunday morning. And that was probably about, I'd say, once a month. I think that was about the treatment, was once a month for that. Vincristine, adriamycin, and Cytoxan I was on pretty much about every other week treatment. I was down there several times a week. Starting in 1989, I was actually in treatment for 2.5 years. They constantly did chest x-rays and things like that, because in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, one of the noticeable places that you'll see any kind of disease or things like that is through the chest x-ray. The chest x-ray would reveal some wispy spots, just some areas on the x-ray that you couldn't really tell if it was tumor or if it was dead tissue or what have you. So then toward the end of my 2.5 years of treatment, they went in and did exploratory surgery, where they actually went through my back and did some, basically it was exploratory to see if the wispy spots in there were dead tissue or if they were still tumor. Come to find out they were dead tissue. And so at that point, they had basically told us that we were in remission. For 2.5 years, I was in remission, for then until I relapsed. It was very, I think the way we approached it was we approached it very softly. It wasn't something that was a major announcement. Of course, our school had to know, the principals had to know, the teachers had to know. A lot of my immediate friends, their parents were called to let them know, just so that they could kind of prepare their children, my friends. When I came back to school, I was actually in the hospital for 2.5 weeks when I was first diagnosed in 1989. And then had the onslaught of treatments and bone marrow aspirations every other week, and spinal taps every other week, where they're sticking needles in your spine and shooting chemotherapy into your spine. Going to see my friends in school and stuff, and returning to school was some sort of normalcy for me. When I left the hospital, the cancer was at the hospital. I usually never brought it home with me, even though it was inside me. I didn't bring it home. It wasn't the woe is Travis, he's sick. It was Travis went to treatment. Now Travis is home and Travis is being Travis. One of the things that really made a difference was whenever my friends offered to shave their head. I was the only kid. Some of my friends were very jealous because back in elementary school, you're not allowed to wear a hat until at least in this county, until you got to high school. So I was the only kid that was allowed to wear a hat. So a lot of kids were getting jealous, and they thought, well, if I shave my head, maybe they'll let me wear a hat. But they were doing it because they cared about me, and they wanted to honor me by doing that and going through the fight with me, which was really great. But not only returning to school and letting my friends know, was returning to playing sports, and sports was my major outlet. It was I would go home during treatments. And I was in the fourth grade when I was diagnosed. So, I mean, that's still a fairly young age. And I was diagnosed in the wintertime. So, a lot of the people, you automatically think about your hair falling out and all these other residual effects of your treatments. But to me, it was, I want to go to school every day. I used to have to I'd have to go by my pediatricians and get my counts done. I would go to school, and if my blood counts were not of a level to where I could be in public, my mom would have to come get me from school, and I'd have to go home until my counts were back up to the point of where I could be in the public again. I could always be around my friends outdoors because I didn't have to worry about catching anything outdoors, but indoors was the big issue, me being confined into small spaces with people, or with kids or adults or what have you, that we didn't know if they had a cold, what kind of germs they had, which could have easily, put me in the hospital for, a period of time, or could even have potentially killed me depending on what my blood counts were. So we used to do that. I used to go home and used to do my chemotherapy and go home and throw up for a couple hours, and then go and play my basketball game that night, and scored 20, 30 points. And it was, to me, we used to have parents that would come up to my parents and say, well, if cancer can't stop that guy, what are we going to do? Because these were parents of my friends that were on opposite teams of mine, and they're like, well, we figured that he wouldn't be able to play because of him being sick, but yet he comes out here after throwing up all afternoon and plays some game, and it looks like we're going to have to break his leg in order to to slow him down, because if cancer can't slow him down, there's nothing that we can do to do that. And that's kind of the way that I saw it. That's the kind of the way I looked at it from the age of 10, is it's not going to slow me down. It's going to make me a better person. It's going to make me enjoy life more. It's going to make me think about my decisions a little bit different than those that aren't facing having cancer or potentially death. And anytime you have cancer and you're a child, there's always that potential death scenario. But my friends were really, really good. Going back to school, my teachers were awesome. Going to Valdez Elementary, I couldn't have asked for a better set of teachers and a better school to go through or to go to. They knew that there were days that I would come to school and I'd have to leave. There were days that they knew that I wouldn't even show up for the whole week because I could not be in school, or I was in the hospital, or I was having studies or things like that done. But as much as I could be in school, I was in school. I wanted to be in school. That was my place. That was my place where I could be with my friends. I made friends at the hospital, but these were my friends. These were the people I saw every day. And so this is where I wanted to be.